Before the story begins, let me tell you, this is not just a tale. It is a storm of betrayal, revenge, and miracles that will grip your heart until the very last word. So, if you want more stories that twist your soul and keep you awake at night, make sure you subscribe to this channel, because what you are about to hear will change the way you look at love, trust, and vengeance forever. My name is Aisha, and I once believed that love was the safest place in the world. I believed that the man I married, the man who wore the white coat of a doctor and swore to heal and protect, would never betray me. But life has a way of tearing illusions apart and leaving you standing in the ruins of your own trust. It began on a rainy evening when I found myself staring at the reflection of my pale face in the mirror, wondering why the fatigue in my bones felt heavier than usual, why the bruises on my skin appeared without reason, why the nights were filled with a strange ache that no sleep could cure. My husband Arman would smile at me with that calm, professional assurance and say it was nothing, just stress, just exhaustion from work and life. And I believed him because he was not only my husband, but also a doctor, and who could I trust if not him? But the truth was far darker than I could imagine. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, and my body began to whisper secrets that my heart did not want to hear. I would wake up drenched in sweat, my hands trembling, my breath shallow. And yet, every time I asked Arman, he would place his hand on mine and tell me that everything was fine, that he had run tests, and there was nothing to worry about. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to cling to the comfort of his words. But deep inside, a shadow was growing, a shadow that told me something was terribly wrong. One night, when he fell asleep in his study, I walked in quietly and saw papers scattered across his desk, medical reports with my name on them, words that blurred before my eyes, but one word stood out like a knife cutting through the silence. The world collapsed around me in that moment. I felt the air leave my lungs. I felt the ground beneath me vanish, and I stood frozen, staring at the truth that my husband had hidden from me. He knew all along, and yet he smiled at me every day. He kissed my forehead, he told me lies wrapped in tenderness, and I realized that the man I trusted with my life had stolen my right to fight for it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him awake and demand why. But instead, I stood there, trembling with rage and grief, and a fire began to burn inside me. A fire that whispered revenge. I did not confront him immediately. No, I decided to play his game, to wear the mask of ignorance, while inside I sharpened my resolve. I began to notice the cracks in his facade. The way he avoided my eyes when I asked questions, the way he grew restless when I mentioned second opinions, the way he guarded his phone and his files as if they were treasures he couldn't afford to lose. And slowly, I began to piece together the puzzle. He was not just hiding my illness, he was hiding something bigger, something that tied my sickness to his ambition. I remembered the nights he came home late, smelling of expensive perfume that was not mine, the hushed phone calls, the sudden trips to conferences that never seemed to exist. And I realized that while I was fading away, he was building another life, a life where I was not included. And that realization broke me, but it also remade me into something stronger. I decided that if he wanted me gone, I would not leave quietly. I would rise from the ashes of his betrayal and take everything from him. The first step was silence. I pretended to be weak, to be fragile, to be the obedient wife who trusted her husband blindly. I let him believe that his secret was safe, that his lies were working. And in that silence, I gathered strength. I began to visit doctors in secret, doctors he did not know. I found out the truth about my condition, and though the word cancer was terrifying, I also discovered that it was not beyond hope, that with treatment and determination, I could fight it. and that knowledge became my weapon. Because now I knew that I was not dying, not yet, and certainly not on his terms. I began to plan carefully, methodically, like a hunter stalking prey. I traced his finances, his hidden accounts, his investments. I discovered the woman he was seeing, a younger woman who thought she had captured the heart of a successful doctor. Little did she know that she was nothing more than a pawn in his game. And I decided that she too would play a role in his downfall. I gathered evidence, photographs, recordings, documents, everything that painted the picture of his betrayal, and I kept it hidden. But revenge is not just about destruction. It is about patience, about letting the enemy believe they are safe until the ground crumbles beneath their feet. So I smiled at him. I cooked his meals. I listened to his lies. And I let him believe that I was fading away quietly, while inside, I was building an empire of truth that would shatter his world. And every night when I lay in bed beside him, I whispered to myself that the day would come when he would know what it felt like to lose everything. The storm began on the day of our anniversary. He had planned a dinner at a luxurious restaurant, pretending to be the perfect husband, while secretly texting his mistress. I wore a red dress that night, not because I wanted to impress him, but because I wanted to mark the beginning of his end. As we sat across from each other, I looked into his eyes, and for the first time, I did not see my husband. I saw my enemy, and I knew that the war had begun. The night was heavy with silence, and I stood outside the house that I once called my home, the house where I had poured my love, my loyalty, and my dreams into every corner, only to be told by the man I trusted above all that I no longer belonged there. He looked at me with eyes that once promised forever, but now they were cold and distant. And beside him stood another woman, her smile sharp like a blade, her hand resting on his arm, as if she had already claimed what was mine. He told me to leave, his voice steady and cruel, as if I were nothing more than a burden he had carried for too long. I felt the ground beneath me tremble, but I did not cry, not in front of them. I walked away with my dignity intact, though inside my heart was shattering into pieces. I wandered through the streets with no destination, the rain falling hard against my skin, washing away the last traces of warmth I had known. I thought of my father, the man who had raised me with strength and wisdom, the man who had always told me that storms reveal the truth of people, and I realized then that my storm had come. But what my husband did not know, what his lover did not know, was that my father was not just any man. He was the man who signed the checks that kept my husband's world alive. He was the man who could build or destroy with a single decision. And though I had never wished to use that power, I felt it stirring inside me like a fire waiting to be unleashed. I returned to my father's house, drenched and broken, and when he saw me, he asked no questions. He only opened his arms, and I collapsed into them. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to be the daughter who needed her father's strength. I told him everything, every cruel word, every betrayal, every humiliation. And as I spoke, I saw his face harden, not with pity, but with a quiet fury that promised justice. He told me to rest, to gather my strength, because the world had a way of turning, and those who thought themselves untouchable often fell the hardest. I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment of my marriage, every sacrifice I had made, every dream I had buried for him. And I realized that love without respect is nothing but a chain, and I had been freed, though the freedom came with pain. I decided then that I would not simply survive, I would rise, and when I rose, I would make sure he saw what he had thrown away. But the story did not end there, because revenge is not always about destruction. Sometimes it is about transformation. I poured myself into my new role, learning every detail, every secret, every strength of the company. I grew into the woman I was meant to be, not defined by betrayal, but by resilience and vision. Yet fate has a way of circling back. One evening, as I left the office, I saw him waiting outside, his eyes hollow, his clothes disheveled, the arrogance gone, replaced by desperation. He begged me to listen to him, to forgive him, to give him another chance. He said he had been blind, that he had been foolish, that the woman he had chosen over me had left him the moment his power was gone. I listened in silence, and when he finished, I told him that forgiveness is not a gift to be begged for, it is a choice, and I had chosen to forgive myself, not him. I told him that I no longer hated him because hate is still a chain, and I was free. He fell to his knees, but I walked away. The night air cool against my skin, carrying with it the scent of freedom and possibility. In the months that followed, I rebuilt my life, piece by piece. I found strength in places I never knew existed. I discovered that the greatest revenge is not in watching someone fall, but in rising so high that they can never reach you again. And yet, there was one final twist, one that even I had not expected. One morning, my father called me into his study, his eyes softer than I had ever seen. He told me that he was stepping down, that he wanted me to take his place, not just as a leader, but as the heart of the empire he had built. I felt tears fill my eyes, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. I accepted, knowing that this was not just my victory, but the victory of every woman who had ever been told she was not enough. I stood at the top of the building that day, looking out at the city below, and I thought of the girl who had once been thrown out into the rain, broken and lost, and I realized she was gone. In her place stood a woman forged by fire, unbreakable, unstoppable, and free. And as the sun rose, painting the sky with gold, I whispered to myself that this was not the end.